I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of the conference as well as the speakers on the panel. I'd also like to amend my biography to also say that I'm a graduate student studying under Anna Hudson. That wasn't included earlier. So I'm going to start by saying that I'm really captivated by this photograph of Mary Wrinch. She stands in a blouse and skirt, knee-deep in weeds, while her feet slowly sink into the muddy shore of Bass Lake. Before her, a large stretched canvas is clamped to an easel to keep it from flying off should a strong wind blow through. She clutches a palette and a fistful of brushes while she looks intently at her composition. The painting, worked on well over 100 years ago, is now a mystery to modern audiences. No such canvas by Wrinch has been located. If the painting was ever finished, it is lost for now. One of the things I love the most about this photograph is that it feels like evidence, proof that a woman artist in Canada painted in the bush of Ontario years before a now very famous group of men did the very same thing. Wrinch's plein air painting excursions have been largely overlooked to instead celebrate the efforts of male artists who similarly painted outdoors, albeit on small wooden panels rather than large canvases. Although Wrinch may have staged or completely fabricated this photograph, it offers an alternative vantage from which landscape painting in Canada in the early 20th century might be viewed. Mary Wrinch was an artist skilled in several different media. She painted delicate portrait miniatures in watercolor, carved and printed elaborate polychrome linoleum block prints, and painted lush modernist landscapes in oil. That she made significant contributions in these various areas has made for a rather complicated legacy. If she is ever mentioned in Canadian art survey texts, it is usually in a line or two that, in an attempt to capture the breadth of her career, actually says little about her work. Like many women artists of her time, Wrinch has not received nearly enough attention, despite her undeniable contribution to art in Canada, and even though, since her death in 1969, she has had significant champions. I acknowledge the research of Joan Murray and Paul Duval, who both interviewed Wrinch in her later years and whose observations on the artist have inspired my own. Murray was among the first art historians to acknowledge Wrinch's contribution to Canadian art history as a modernist, and was the first to curate a solo exhibition of her work at the Art Gallery of Ontario in 1969. In recent years, Wrinch has been the subject of a touring exhibition organized by the Art Gallery of Windsor in 2012 and a solo exhibition that opened at the Art Gallery of Ontario in 2020. One would assume that such high-profile exposure would have strengthened her reputation, but Wrinch's work has still largely flown under the radar. When I attended an event for the uninvited at the McMichael earlier in September, several people came up to me to remark specifically at how impressed they were by Wrinch's paintings on display, as if they didn't know she had it in her to make such strong work. Can I have the next slide, please? This seems like an excellent place to start when discussing Wrinch and the landscape. On the right, we see her Sawmills Muskoka, painted not far from where she would later build a studio cottage on the Lake of Bays outside of Huntsville, near Algonquin Park. The painting was exhibited at the Ontario Society of Artists annual exhibition in 1907, where it was shown alongside the painting at left, Tranquility by George Agnew Reid, Wrinch's former teacher at the Central School of Art. Tranquility was hailed in the Globe as one of the finest works in the exhibition, but the only mention of Wrinch's painting came from the American Art News, which called it a pleasing and interesting picture. From a contemporary vantage, Reid's tonalist-inspired painting depicting herons and cattails in a marsh seems somewhat kitsch, whereas Wrinch's impressionist canvas depicting industry seems vital and modern. It is not altogether surprising that Wrinch's painting did not receive much attention in Toronto, as European painting trends were slow to arrive in the city. Wrinch had experienced Impressionism firsthand in France, having painted there briefly in the early 20th century. Of this time, she later recalled, "It was such a revelation being in France at that time. I went to Giverny to paint and saw Monet a few times, but never met him. But the experience of France changed my whole approach to painting." Wrinch's proximity to George Reid as his student, friend, and later wife have often meant that her paintings are grouped alongside his, despite the radical difference in her painting style. The juxtaposition of the paintings on display show, I believe, Reed's looking to the past, painting in an already outmoded style, and Wrinch is looking forward towards modernism. Can I have the next slide, please? I had initially placed a second painting on this slide. I tried various Arctic scenes by Lauren Harris, A.Y. Jackson, and Fred Varley, but decided to give more real estate to Wrinch's incredible jagged cliffs of Scarborough and allow you to conjure a work by any member of the group in your mind. Wrinch's landscape paintings feel much more at home alongside those of the group than those of her husband. And indeed, there was more than just an aesthetic connection, as Wrinch's paintings were often exhibited alongside those of the group. Notably, her paintings were included in the Room of the Moderns at the British Empire exhibition at Wembley in 1924, while her husband's were included in an adjacent gallery of traditional Canadian painters. In 1926, 10 of her paintings were included in an exhibition of 9 modern Canadian artists at the Art Gallery of Toronto, where they were shown alongside works by artists Lauren Harris, A.Y. Jackson, J.H. MacDonald, and Tom Thompson. Interestingly, although Wrinch's exploration of the landscape largely began in Northern Ontario, it gradually moved south. By the 1910s, Wrinch regularly painted the 100-foot bridge outside of her home in Winchwood Park, the rolling hills of the Don Valley, and the area around the Scarborough Bluffs. Whereas many of her male contemporaries sought to explore the land further and further from cities, Wrinch sought to find the landscape within them. The jagged cliffs of Scarborough is a strange and almost alien scene. If you've never seen the bluffs before, you might assume the sketch was painted somewhere remote or exotic, and not just little more than 20 kilometers from Toronto's downtown core. Wrinch didn't need to take a boxcar or supply ship to find the subject, just a car and a packed lunch. And while her journey to paint was less epic than those of some other artists, the resulting painting can, I think, stand up to the best sketches produced in Canada in this period. Can I have the next slide, please? A sunset feels the apt place to end. Wrinch's painting, Last Glow, might be too beautiful. The buttery sky and the foliage of the elm trees aglow with blue tones are so pretty that it is almost as if the work itself can't be taken seriously as a work of modern art. But the brilliant artist that Wrinch was, she pulled back moments before the painting became too picturesque. The trunks of the trees are alive with an almost frenetic cluster of stabs of paint, and the rolling hills in front of her are a mere wash of muddy browns. Wrinch had the rare ability to balance the aesthetic beauty of the landscape with the wildness of it. To end my discussion of Mary Wrinch today, I'll say that it actually feels more like a beginning. Thank you.